Welcome back to America's Retirement Headquarters, home of the Retirement Guys Formula and America's Medicare Associates with Nolan Baker, Scott Kirshner, and Chaz Price. 419-794-3030 is the phone number. The website, americasretirementheadquarters.com or arhq.com. Inflation and the fear of running out of money in retirement has persuaded many early retirees, perhaps those from the Great Resignation, to return to the workplace. But is that a wise move? There was an article in the Wall Street Journal that talks about 3 ways to gauge that question. Guys, I know you've had a chance to look at the article. What do you think of these? And have you had clients who've maybe had second thoughts about returning after you reviewed their retirement plan?
Yeah, so in the article, it talks about the 3 areas. Number 1 is the value of your spare time. Number 2 is looking at the power of semi-retirement. And number 3 is test driving your retirement. And I would say, that conversation has come up quite a bit, in my 20 plus years of experience of being in this industry. And more so, I think recently, and if you think about 2022, depending upon how people's investments were allocated, I know people have come into our office that maybe had money in a 401k and hadn't really thought much about it or looked much at it. And all of a sudden, the stock market went down and their 401k balance went down 20 or 25%. And then you add on top of that, you had inflation was up, 10%. Now they're backwards 35%, and they're really kind of guessing that question of, hey, I just retired a year or 2 ago. Should I or do I need to go back to work? Is it worth going back to work after retirement? Is kind of a question that they have. And it really depends upon, what financial confidence that you have. First of all, if you're listening out there today and you're within 5 years before or 5 years after retirement time, one of the big takeaways to think about is you're in what I call the retirement red zone. And I know that you were at the Bengals game recently, and talk about being in the red zone.
Boy,
and you can't fumble in the red zone, right?
Don't fumble in the red zone, right?
Not at the goal line, right? So you guys, if you're within those 5 years, you're at the goal line. Don't fumble at the goal line. And one of the ways that you could fumble at the goal line is what is called the sequence of return risk that you have in a portfolio. So if your desire is to get and stay retired and be confident through retirement, one of the things that you want to do is spend a little bit of time learning about the sequence of return risk and not having a portfolio that all of a sudden is upside down right away in the early years of your retirement. So you want to make sure that you don't have all of your money exposed to risk. That's a big takeaway, I would say, something that I see. The other thing that I see that catches people off guard on why oftentimes they need to think about going back to work. So I'm talking about the group first and foremost that is forced back in.
Sure.
That second part is the people that move into retirement, before the age of 65, and they're like, you know what? I'm just not going to get health insurance because I've not had any health issues at all. I'm in great shape. I just need to wait till I get to 65 and I'll be fine. And all of a sudden something bad happens. And, making a decision to leave yourself exposed to a danger of not having the proper health insurance can also be a big disaster.
Yeah, I run into it a lot where people will actually run into a situation. I actually had a client that very healthy. I get a phone call. She's actually down in Florida. I get a phone call from her, and she said, hey, Scott, I had a stroke. And I said, oh, my gosh, you okay? She's, well, I'm doing fine, but I was put on a new medication, and she was put on Eliquis. Well, Eliquis is a very expensive drug. And, I've seen situations where people go back to work, like you said, Nolan, kind of forced back to work because of benefits. I just can't afford this cost on my own. With the retirement I have set up, my investments aren't, working necessarily with the market fluctuating. What are my options? So they choose to go back to work, I also run into situations where, like you said, you have to check the value of your spare time. A lot of people just aren't retirement people. I mean, you work 30, 40 years of your life, and all of a sudden you retire, and now what am I doing? You're sitting there looking at your wife, and one's playing with the thermostat, and raising it up and down, right? So I've had people that are contract employees that go back to work just because they love what they were doing before. they don't necessarily need to work, but they go back to work because they love it. And, the other thing is they look at maybe going back semi-retire, part-time work. You don't have to go back full-time. A lot has to do with your own sanity, too. I mean, goodness, sitting at home doing nothing. I know, Nolan, you and I are not those kind of people. If we're sitting at home doing nothing, it seems like we need to be doing something.
No, I mean, I can think of a couple of specific client examples. Captain Will, who took us out fishing.
Absolutely,
I mean, he's somebody that's out there making income, going out, taking people fishing on Lake Erie. I could see myself all day long. I'll be a fishing boat captain out there. So making income, doing what you love doing. I play golf at Riverby over in Waterville. I know there's a couple of guys that work out there that are retired that, they work at the golf course. They get unlimited golf. They get to play as much golf as they want. They get outside. They're still doing exercise, keeping them young and healthy. The power of semi-retirement, today's age is a little bit different. I think there's so much knowledge and value for people who have been in the industry for a long time that, even being able to give 1, 2, or a couple of days a week or a couple of hours a day gives you a lot of power of semi-retirement. And then test driving your retirement, taking a month off of these times that you've built up. I see people that, build up their vacation time and, they never really test drive retirement.
Sure. As
you talk about, when you're in the house all that time, things are going to change a little bit. But doing that test drive is going to give you a chance to discover what makes you happy, what you want to do, maybe what kind of new work that you want to do. And I guess, Chaz, when you look at it and you're talking to different people and they're asking that question about, is it worth going back to work after retirement? What are the type of tips that you're giving folks?
Yeah, well, I like that term semi-retirement. I think the author of the book, The 4-Hour Workweek, I think it's Chris Ferris maybe, he talks about and advocates, having those little intermittent retirements in there instead of one big retirement for 30 years, take a month off or 2. So I like that was included. The other thing we didn't really chat about is working from home. The new trend where it's not so bad anymore. You can actually work at home, make a pretty decent living, and it's certainly not retirement, but there are things that you can do now to make some money that previously you maybe weren't able to do. But to me, it's obviously a difference between, are you forced into going back to work, or are you just doing it because you need something else to do? Because I think there's a ton of great charities. There's some hobbies out there. There's a lot of other things that if I didn't have to work, you probably would enjoy doing a lot. And so to me, it comes down to the financial plan and what our trade-offs are. And I kind of describe the financial planning process kind of like the EQ on your radio. It's a little different for everybody. You accentuate some bass here, maybe some treble and other, cars and things like that. So anything that we move up, there's usually an associated thing that would move down maybe. So for instance, if you stave off retiring, maybe you can spend a little bit more. Or if you agree to spend a little less, maybe you can retire a little earlier. Or work a few hours per week, maybe you can retire earlier and spend more money. So again, it really comes down to the planning that goes into it, what in your physical ability to work, I think, and then also what your spending strategy is. Mm-hmm. So we talk about this a lot in the financial plan. This is usually kind of the last concept that we cover, but not everybody in retirement spends the same.
Right.
Some people spend in what we would call an inflation-adjusted pattern, where each day they get a little better, like a fine wine. Right, Scott? You just keep getting better.
Absolutely.
And so we spend no matter what. We don't take into consideration the market or anything like that. We provide you an extra 3% per year. Other people spend in what we call as a smile, where they spend the same and then spending goes down in their slow-go years and then it goes up. So the final stage, I guess, we would look at for spending would be the floor and ceiling, what we call it. So we just basically spend more when the market's good and spend less when the market's down. And so if we're able to, again, articulate what strategy you want to adopt, you may not have to work, ideally, for some.
Sure. So I guess the big question is it worth going back to work after retirement? And the answer would be, it depends. Mm-hmm. I know that's not a good answer, but it is the truth. It depends on what is best going to fit your needs and if you need to or not.
Obviously, the goal once you retire is to stay retired and not have to go back into the workforce out of necessity. If you want to do it, that's a whole other situation. And again, weighing the pros and cons, whether that is going to be financially beneficial to you or financially detrimental, it's probably better to know about that ahead of time. But sitting down and speaking with people, just like going into retirement, getting out of retirement, go ahead and have that conversation with the team at America's Retirement Headquarters and find out what's going to work best for you. 419-794-3030. You can go online to arhq.com. Don't forget, at the events tab there, a lot of great workshops and events. And coming up this Tuesday, movie night as well. You can find out all this information, including how to go ahead and reserve your seats for these at arhq.com.